What's the strangest conversation you've accidentally eavesdropped on? A few kids were debating on what happened to the poop after you flushed it on the train. One believed it exploded on impact with the rails, another debated the possibility of it being shot out of the side like a cannon, and another knew it was used to fuel the train. Not something I heard, but what someone eavesdropped on me. I used to work at a restaurant, and every member of the kitchen staff was Indian, and didn't speak English very well. There was one white guy that worked there, and for whatever reason, they all called him Ding Ding. White guy was having a birthday party, and invited us all. One of the Indian guys, and myself were standing outside the restaurant smoking, and the Indian guy says to me, Indian accent, "Hey man, you going to Ding Ding party?" A guy walking by us stopped, and said, "I'm sorry, I just overheard you guys, and I have to know what a Ding Ding party is." I couldn't stop laughing, and eventually told him what it was. I was eating beside two older gentlemen at a bar, and I hear one of them say something like, "That stupid cat follows me everywhere. I've told my granddaughter to keep it away from me, but everyone thinks it's funny. I can't get away from it." There's silence between the two, and then the second older man laughs. "You secretly love that little hairball, don't you?" The guy lets out a giant, irritated sigh and sullenly admits, "Yes, I was in line for a rollercoaster years ago when I overheard a 12-year-old and her even younger sister talking to two nice strangers, all standing in line behind me. The 12-year-old was talking about how she lives on a farm with her grandparents, her little sister and her newborn kid. She goes on and on about her young kid, and how her grandparents homeschool her so she has time to raise and take care of her kid, and how her little sister is helping too. She goes on to describe how little and precious and sweet her kid is and how much she loves her. I spent the entire time in line stunned and speechless and impressed by how engaged and unbothered the two strangers were during the whole conversation, i.e. asking to see pictures etc. It wasn't until we got to the front of the line that I realized she meant kid, as in a baby goat. Dude walking down Collins Avenue by South Beach in Miami on his cell phone. Said, "But baby, you know I gots to slap you if you piss me off." She had left him and he was calling her to plead for her to come back to him. He sounded genuinely upset. Florida man. I was at a rave and we went outside to the smoking area. Past a group of people and one guy was really excitedly saying, "You're gonna die, I'm gonna die, and everyone we know is gonna die." Really wish I'd stopped to hear where that was going. I was eavesdropping on some popular girls in middle school, and the question came up between who they thought they would hook up with in my group of friends. They said my name. Biggest confidence boost I've had to this day. I was sitting in a Chinese restaurant with my friend next to some construction workers, and I said something along the lines of, "Has Enrique received the shipment?" And my friend played along and said, "Yes, but if he finds out we cut it with baby laxatives, we're over." We continued the conversation for a few minutes and I could see the construction workers getting a little weirded out. They got their bill and walked out, and on their way out I heard one loudly exclaim to the other, "Them boys were talking about lacing something with baby laxatives." I've not heard full-on conversations, but I have heard some funny one-liners in passing. Walking through a parking lot of a shopping center with a bunch of restaurants, and I hear some guy say as he's walking past me, "I can't even go to the strip club on my lunch hour anymore." Another time I was walking out of the grocery store and this guy ran up to his friends and said, "Hey man, you heard of some shit called couscous? I guess this might get buried, but it's too good not to share." I was chilling with a friend in the beach, by the sea, when I overheard a guy telling a girl this story. He used to have an Asian housemate, who kept to himself. After a while the other housemates, realized they never saw him. They tried his door, but it was locked. A few weeks went by. It was normal to not see him often, but eventually it was very strange that he had just stopped showing up. Eventually a really weird, horrible smell started coming from his room. That's when they started to get worried. Eventually they broke the door down. They came into the room, and to their horror saw some legs sticking out from under the bed. Until they realized it was tights. Stuffed with rotting chicken chow mein. And then they saw a hole had been opened up, well, you can guess where. Suffice to say I listened to this story with mounting horror and fascination. I think the teller was on a date, and told the story completely calmly, and the girl was equally chill about it. So yes, I think this meets the criteria of this thread. I was once in a Starbucks in Boston and witnessed a breakup which was immediately followed a failed proposal attempt. It was the craziest thing. The dude was very into her and her body language did not reply in a copacetic manner. He confessed his love to her, she replied that it wasn't gonna work and she might need some time. He replied, "We have the rest of our lives to figure it out, so you have time." He got down on a knee, pulled out a ring, she stood up and said, "This is what I am talking about." "You don't listen." She asked him to stand up. He said with tears in his eyes, "Why? I am still waiting for an answer." She gathered her things, took left out the back. The man sat back down and finished his frappuccino while crying. I refer to the story as the saddest cold coffee beverage ever. Well, sort of the opposite, but when I was in high school, we would run laps around the perimeter drive of our football field for PE, and part of this drive was right up next to a bunch of classrooms. A lot of times, teachers would have the windows open. My high school is an old Frankenstein of additions from the last 120 years, so we still have windows that open and close, so my friends and I made it a point to have the absolute weirdest conversations we could right next to any of these open windows in an effort to distract and confuse anyone who happened to be listening from inside. I think my favorite starter anecdote was, and I shamelessly stole this from Whose Line, and that's how my colon ended up in my esophagus. I was later told by one of the teachers who recognized me that their whole class stopped and confusedly looked at each other before laughing it off. It was one of my proudest moments. Last night I was at a AAA farm team game in my city and two men were sitting right behind me. They were friends from college. One was married and sounded more honest and mature. The other one wasn't married and described his apartment as being empty of anything but his mattress on the floor of his bedroom. The second guy kept calling girls either hot or ugly and his friend asked him to tone it down bit. They were saying this truly just 12 inches behind my ears and they were talking loud to be heard over the commercials playing on the screen before the game. The second one asked the mature one if he thought he could hit one of the pitches and he replied not without some training. The second one claimed he could hit one of those any day of the week. Eventually I moved because the second one wanted advice on getting laid and I just couldn't take it anymore. I once sat on my balcony, 3rd floor, at 2 a.m. to listen to a guy, ground level, who discovered his girlfriend was cheating on him, 4th floor. He climbed a tree and saw her topless with a guy with her light on. I opened a beer and took a seat. You said you were studying. You don't study with your shirt off. Didn't hear the full conversation but I walked in on two employees at a convenience store with the conversation ending with the phrase, "and that's when we hid the clams," reply. Coming home on Amtrak from visiting my family a few years ago. A young 20-something couple sits behind me, and they clearly have just gotten engaged. They're happy, they're talking to each other in just the most loving, affectionate way, and discussing plans for their upcoming wedding. It's all good. This is clearly a happy and excited couple, and you could tell this was probably the first discussion they'd had about their wedding plans. So the girl happily brings up something about what they should have on the menu, like 2 or 3 choices for the adults, but then a 4th option that the kids would like, and the guy goes, "Kids? I don't want kids there." Instantly, the temperature in the train car drops about 10 degrees. She goes, "You don't? How can we not let kids there? We have family members with kids. Kids have to be allowed." Then he says, and this is a point I thought was very valid, he says, having kids at the wedding or having a child-free wedding makes it a very different kind of ceremony. It's not just a matter of kids are allowed, kids aren't allowed. It changes the tone of the whole thing, which, actually I agree with. I'm not married, but I've been to plenty of weddings that were kid-free and some that were kids allowed, and they were both very different. The train ride was 3.5 hours, and the conversation just got worse and worse the whole way. Again, to give the prospective groom credit, he stayed very calm and tried to be rational about it. She went from glowingly happy to less happy, to attempted neutrality to furious. By the time we got to our destination, she was crying and yelling at him. He made points that, if we don't have kids at our wedding, it doesn't mean we don't like kids, or don't love our family members who have kids. It just means that if we want a more adult, intimate wedding, it's something we need to strongly consider. I wondered about him later on, if that was something that was clearly a deal breaker for both of them. I was on the train listening to a woman yell on the phone that she wouldn't be able to make it to her dentist appointment because she had left her teeth at home. I had a student job as an interim music director in a Catholic church. While upstairs in the choir loft getting things ready for a rehearsal later that day, I overheard the pastor talking to his parochial vicar, assistant priest, in the area below. The pastor said, "People are complaining that your masses are too long, you need to move it along." The assistant said something like, "I don't know how to say mass any quicker than I do." In a louder voice, the pastor said, "Don't overthink it. Get 'em in, get their money, and get 'em out." And with that, he left the church, with the assistant just standing there by himself. Sudden lull in an otherwise noisy pub, bar, in England. One line of a conversation drifts across. "Well, we've got triangular bees." Everyone suddenly looks confused. At a Motel 6 in Eureka, CA was visiting Redwoods with my family as a kid. As we're trying to sleep, a couple in the next room over start fighting and the guy says, "Don't break my ACHEY breaky heart." Best part was my mum said, "Just lay down low in case there's any gunshots." Thanks mum. SMH. Years ago I lived in a dumpy 4-plex row house. Our neighbors who have attempted to convert us to their religion several times are arguing. It gets louder and louder until I hear through the window, clear as day, "Give me back my teeth, you asshole." Apparently she wanted to go out drinking, so he stole her teeth. I heard a 6-year-old accuse another 6-year-old of giving him the hiccups. At a supermarket I heard someone yell, "He's doing what to the broccoli?" then run outside at full pelt. I often wonder what he did to the broccoli.